Many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, check the link in the description. But now, enjoy the video. Gran Turismo was a true pioneer when it came to bringing in-depth tuning into mainstream racing games. From the very first title in the series, upgrades grounded to real-life logic were an important part of the experience. However, for the longest time, there was always something missing. An engine swap is the act of replacing the engine in one car with the engine from another. In tuning circles, they're often seen as a holy grail, creating the potential for some truly insane builds. Naturally, many racing games have tried to replicate this idea as well, but Gran Turismo was not one of them. That was until Gran Turismo 7 in 2022, when the engine swap feature made its much anticipated debut. Now, a lot can be said about how Polyphony handled this feature in the beginning, and not a lot of it would be positive. But over time, things have gradually improved, and new engine swaps are added to the game with every update. But the types of swaps you'll find in GT7 in many ways differ from most other racing games. In those titles, you'll find a handful of generic engine swaps that can be done to most cars, with a few brand-specific ones thrown in. In GT7, the swaps are far less predictable. As of writing, there are 50 different engines that can be swapped into various makes and models. These range from the more conventional swaps that are often seen in real life, to ones that are truly outlandish. However, what makes these swaps really fascinating from my perspective is that many of them are references to real cars. These include not only legends from past GT games, but also machines that have never been seen in this series. Honestly, there are some really interesting deep cuts to be found here, and today I'm going to share with you my personal favourites and their fascinating real-life backstories. Let's start with a car that was first brought to the series with GT7, the 993 generation Porsche 911 Carrera RS. This car can have the engine from the Ruf CTR3 fitted. Now, the CTR3 is the third car in Ruf's flagship CTR lineage. However, unlike its predecessors, it is an entirely original model that came with its own bespoke engine. As you might be able to guess, this swap is a reference to another Ruf model, specifically the BTR2. This is a car that has appeared in the series before in Gran Turismo 2. Essentially all it is an upgraded 993, and that goes for the engine as well. In real life, this car used the 3.6-litre flat 6 from the 993, but with various improvements. The most notable of these was the addition of a turbocharger, thus making the BTR2 the first version of the 993 to come with a turbo, predating Porsche's own 993 turbo by a good 2 years. However, the flat 6 from the CTR3 has 2 turbochargers instead of just one, and is also considerably more powerful at almost 700 horsepower, whereas the BTR2 only had around 400. What this means is that the swap we see in GT7 is more of a reference in spirit rather than trying to be an accurate recreation. Let's move on to the Jaguar XJ220 and its unique swap that allows you to fit it with the V12 from the Le Mans winning Jaguar XJR9. When the XJ220 was first shown off as a concept car at the 1988 British International Motor Show, it featured a V12 derived from those used in Jaguar's Group C prototypes. However, by the time the car went into production, this was replaced by a 3.5-litre twin-turbo V6. Now, there are quite a few misconceptions as to why this change was made, so let me set the record straight. In spite of their win at Le Mans in 1988, it was generally accepted that Jaguar's big, naturally aspirated V12s were less competitive than the smaller turbocharged units of their rivals, most notably Sauber Mercedes. So, for 1989, they debuted an all-new twin-turbo V6. Or at least it appeared as all new, because it was actually based on the engine used in the Metro 6R4 Group B rally car. There were two versions, a 3-litre unit used in the XJR10 that raced in IMSA, and a 3.5-litre for the XJR11 that campaigned in the World Sports Prototype Championship. Unfortunately, this new engine didn't achieve the results that were hoped for, with reliability often being an issue. At the same time, Jaguar realised that their V12 wasn't best suited to the XJ220 road car, with it being deemed too large and too heavy, although it was emissions concerns that ultimately ruled it out. Needing a replacement engine, they realised that the 6R4-based twin-turbo V6 would be an ideal fit that still provided plenty of power, whilst also being far more efficient than the V12. So, with all of that context considered, this engine swap is very clearly a reference to the original V12 prototype of the XJ220. It is worth noting that whilst the engine from the XJR9 is a 7-litre V12, the version seen in the prototype XJ220 was only a 6.2. Some of you may also know that the prototype powered all 4 wheels, but However, due to the complexity of its four-wheel drive system, this was changed to rear-wheel drive only in the production model. GT7 doesn't currently have any drivetrain swaps, so this sadly cannot be replicated. The first generation Corvette made its return to the series in the version 1.36 update of GT7, and later received an engine swap. On the surface, this one might not seem that interesting. After all, the LT5 from the Corvette C7ZR1 is one of the most common engine swaps available. However, this is another neat reference to a car that's previously appeared in these games. Since 2004, series producer Kazunori Yamauchi has given out a Gran Turismo award for his favourite car at the SEMA show in Las Vegas. The winner of this award would then go on to appear in the game, and it just so happens that in 2006, this honour went to the Art Morrison 1960 Corvette. Created by father-son duo Art and Craig Morrison, this car is what we would now call a resto mod, a classic car that's been restored and modified using modern parts. Of course, the most important upgrade here is with the engine, as a 7-litre overhead valve V8 was fitted. This car appeared in the series starting with Gran Turismo 5 Prologue in 2008, and then went on to feature in the full game as well as GT6. Again, its recreation in GT7 isn't like for like. Whilst the engine from the C7ZR1 is also an overhead valve V8, it's instead a supercharged 6.2-litre rather than the NA 7-litre in the real car. Again, this results in it being considerably more powerful, having over 200 horsepower more than the car it's based on. In GT7, the Corvette C1 can also be fitted with a custom roll hoop that looks almost identical to the one from the Art Morrison, making it even easier to create a decent replica. From one iconic sports car to another, let's now turn our attention to the 4th generation Toyota Supra. Whilst its 2JZ engine can be swapped into various different cars, this Supra only has one engine swap of its own, but it's a doozy. The Mercedes-built V12 from the Pagani Huayra. On the surface, this is a very left-field choice, especially considering that this swap is unique to the Supra. However, if you're in the know, this reference will be very obvious. The Supra has long been known for its tuning potential, and one of the many companies to exploit this was Top Secret. The founder of the company, Smokey Nagata, has famously carried out top speed runs on public roads using highly modified Supras. However, in 2007, he would unveil what many consider to be his magnum opus. This is the Top Secret V12 Supra. Using the 1GZ FE engine from the Toyota Century limousine as a basis, many upgrades were fitted, including 2 HKS turbos. The net result was 950 horsepower at full boost, and Nagata would drive the car to over 220 miles an hour at the Nardo Ring in Italy. Of course, given that GT7 doesn't have a V12 Toyota Century yet, the use of the Huayra engine is the closest alternative. It is also twin turbocharged, but has a higher displacement of 6 litres compared to the 5-litre 1GZ. In stock form, it only makes 730 horsepower, but this can be upgraded. GT7 unfortunately doesn't feature any aero parts that mimic the V12 Supra's unique G-Force body kit, but even still, it's pretty cool to see this nod to arguably one of the most iconic tuning cars ever made. Ferrari as a brand has always been very protective of their IP, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that you can't swap anyone else's engines into their cars in GT7. In fact, as of writing, it's only possible to engine swap one Ferrari, the F40. This car can take the 6-litre V12 from the Enzo, and yet again, this isn't something that was made up entirely for the game. Back in the 90s, gentleman driver Stefano Sebastiani was racing a Ferrari 348 at Le Mans, prepared by UK outfit Simpson Motorsport. Even though his 2 attempts at the race in 1993 and 94 didn't amount to much, he still maintained a good relationship with team owner and co-driver Robin Smith, as well as Ferrari themselves, who oversaw the project. Several years later, in 2001, Sebastiani came into possession of a crash-tested F40 chassis directly from Ferrari. From there, he enlisted Simpson Motorsport to rebuild the car to FIA GT standards, including the LM Aero kit. But they decided to make one very big change. The twin-turbo V8 from the car was replaced with a 5.5-litre V12 from the then-current 550 Maranello. The finished car was dubbed the Simpson Ferrari V12 GTR, and Sebastiani would proceed to race it in the UK and Italy for several years. Perhaps its most well-known appearance was in the British GT Championship in 2003, where it appeared for 2 races. Even though it proved to be quite quite rapid, reliability was always its Achilles heel, and it never achieved any notable results. As the only V12-powered F40 in existence, this makes its reference in GT7 a lot clearer. Of course, the Maranello's 5.5-litre V12 has been changed to the 6-litre unit from the Enzo as the nearest match, but the power figure is still similar. Having been stored for a number of years, the real car resurfaced in 2023 when it was put up for sale, complete with UK road registration. The engine from the BMW Z4 GT3 can be swapped into a handful of BMW road cars. However, easily the most significant of these is the E46 M3. After introducing the E46 3 Series in 1998, BMW decided to take the car racing, but soon found themselves outclassed by Porsche's 911 in the GT ranks. So for 2001, they decided to make some radical changes. Out went the car's usual inline-6 engine, and in went a bespoke 4-litre V8. The car was also given various aerodynamic enhancements, and the upgraded model as a whole was dubbed the M3 GTR. With this car, BMW was finally able to overhaul Porsche in the American Le Mans series, dominating the 2001 season. BMW had also created 10 road-going versions to satisfy homologation in 2001, but following lobbying from Porsche, the ALMS rules were changed for the following year. For the car to be fully legal, they now had to build 100 examples and a total of 1,000 examples of the engine used in it. Having already achieved what they set out to do, BMW decided not to bother and instead pulled out of the series. However, the car would still be raced in various other events all over the world, including the Nürburgring 24 Hours. In 2004, they would achieve a 1-2 finish, and then would incredibly repeat the same feat the following year. So yes, this engine swap is obviously a reference to the BMW M3 GTR. I mean, when you're putting a V8 in an E46, what else could it be? The engine from the Z4 GT3 is actually an evolution of the one used in the M3 GTR. It was since bored out to 4.4 litres and produced around 520 horsepower, about 80 more than the M3. In between the two, it was also used in the E92 M3 GT2, something that is referenced in GT7 as the E92 road car can also have the engine fitted, even though the real GT2 car still appears. Of course, longtime Gran Turismo players should already be familiar with the E46 GTR thanks to its appearance in the series from GT4 to GT6 in both road car and race car forms. However, it's in another racing game franchise where it's left the biggest mark. First appearing in Need for Speed Most Wanted in 2005, the car still retains an active presence in that series to this very day, arguably becoming the poster car of the franchise. Now, let's look at the humble first-generation Mazda Roadster. This car has one engine swap available, the 13B rotary engine from the FD RX-7, and this yet again mirrors an interesting real-life basis. In 1995, the Nagami Project/Kageisen racing team entered a Mazda RX-7 FC in the All Japan GT Championship. Over the next few seasons, their results were decent, achieving a couple of top 10 finishes in the GT300 class, but nothing more. In 1997, they decided to replace their aging RX-7 with a new race car based on the NA Mazda Roadster. However, to improve performance, they decided to fit the car with a 13B twin-rotor engine, much like the one from their RX-7. It was quite an interesting solution, but didn't provide the desired results. The car competed in 4 JGTC races across 1997 and 1998, failing to finish in all of them and never showing noteworthy speed. Despite not really achieving anything, this is another one of those cars that has attained cult status purely through existing. After all, it was the only Mazda Roadster to ever compete in the JGTC, and with a rotary swap no less. So with that said, I'll actually share a few interesting things that I learnt about this car that aren't widely known. One is that it's left-hand drive, supposedly because it was easier to package the engine that way. Another is that the car appeared in an early 2000s anime called X-Driver. But what I find the most interesting is that the JGTC races were not its only outings. There are images on the internet of it competing at Tsukuba Circuit in a Roadster 1 make race, even appearing to win against admittedly less professional competition. Weirder still is the car re-emerging 8 years after its last competitive outing at a Japan Le Mans Challenge round at Motegi in 2006. After expressing his interest in the event, team owner and driver Toshihiko Nagami was invited to participate. In the end, the car only ran in the practice session and not the race itself, although there are pictures of it on the grid with the other cars. After this, the car was sold to a private collector in 2007, but it does still make occasional public appearances. 13B rotary swaps in Mazda Roadsters are surprisingly common, so we can't say with 100% certainty that this reference is intentional, but there's no denying that the GT300 Roadster was a total outlier when it came to the world of racing. Whilst we're on the topic of Mazda, let me ask you this. What is the greatest engine Mazda ever created? There's a very good chance that your answer is the R26B, the legendary 4-rotor that powered some of their Group C machines, including the Le Mans winning 787B. Considering that, I guess it's not too surprising that you can swap this engine into quite a few different Mazda models in GT7. However, the three that I want to highlight in this video are the 3rd generation RX-7, 4th generation Roadster NRA, and the Mazda 3. All of these swaps have one thing in common, besides just the engine. Michael Wedette, better known as Mad Mike, is a professional drifter from New Zealand who's had a long association with Mazda, and in particular their rotary engines. His first pro drift car was an FD RX-7, and in 2009 he swapped out its usual 13B2 rotor for a custom-built 26B4 rotor, creating what he called Mad Bull. With this car, he would win a round of Formula Drift Asia in 2009, and the following year he would get another 4-rotor RX-7. This one he calls Humble. With the addition of 2 turbos, it makes over 1,000 horsepower, and he would actually claim the Formula Drift Japan title with it in 2018. The next car that Mad Mike would put a 4-rotor in was the NC Mazda Roadster that he campaigned in Formula Drift in 2015, known as Rad Bull. In 2016, he would update the car with body panels from the ND Roadster, but mechanically it was still based on the NC. The engine was again twin turbocharged, pushing out around 1,200 horsepower. Since then, it's actually been downgraded to a 20B3 rotor for the sake of drivability. And the final 4-rotor swap car we need to talk about here is his Mazda 3, also known as Bullet. This car was again strapped with a couple of turbos and makes an astounding 1,400 horsepower. However, Mad Mike's plan for it was a bit different. As you would expect, the car was converted to rear-wheel drive, but it wasn't intended for drifting. Instead, he would race the car at the Pikes Peak hill climb in 2023, achieving a time of 10 minutes and 34 seconds, the fastest run recorded by a Mazda or a rotary-powered car. Given the limited customization of GT7, you can't make these cars look quite as extreme as their real-life inspirations, but the fact that you can swap in a 700 horsepower 4-rotor engine is still pretty damn cool regardless. If you ask me, one of the most interesting engine swaps from purely the engine perspective is the 2.7-litre V8 from the Suzuki Vision GT Group 3 race car. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that, as you might expect coming from a Vision GT car, this exact engine doesn't actually exist in real life. However, it does have a real basis, supposedly being 2 inline-4 engines from Suzuki's Hayabusa sports bike strapped together and then twin turbocharged. The end result is a very high revving V8 that makes close to 600 horsepower. This engine can be swapped into a few different vehicles, but the choice of this Subaru BRZ as one of the recipients is a very sly nod to a similar real-world build. Jun Auto are another one of the big names from Japan's tuning car scene. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, their signature bright yellow cars became a normal sight in events across Japan and even the world. But in 2014, they set out to create one of their most unique builds yet. On the surface, this Subaru BRZ looks just like any of their other creations, but it contains a very unique power plant. Instead of the usual 4-cylinder boxer engine, you'll now find a 2.4-litre V8 that revs to over 10,000 RPM. The 356 horsepower it makes comes courtesy of 2 Kawasaki Ninja engines joined together with a custom aluminium engine block. This process was carried out by New Zealand-based specialists Prototipo under their Synergy Engines brand. As such, the full name of this car is the Jun Auto Synergy V8 BRZ. So in GT7, the engine may come from Suzuki instead of Kawasaki, but this is still a very clear reference to the only twin motorcycle V8 powered BRZ that exists, as far as I know. Interestingly, although the exact engine used here doesn't exist in real life, there are plenty of custom-built Hayabusa-based V8s out there. They've been put into a wide variety of different machines, from small compacts to high downforce hill climb specials. In fact, back in 2013, Radical Cars unveiled their own line of Hayabusa-based V8 engines for use in their cars. Known as PowerTech RPA V8s, the line even includes a 2.7-litre version, just like the one from the Suzuki Vision GT, only minus the turbos. It's been a little while since we've looked at a swap that references a car from a past GT game, so let's check out another one. Both the AE86 Toyota Corolla 11 and Sprinter Trueno can take the 3S GTE engine from the second-gen Toyota MR2. Back in the 90s, the 3S GTE was a very prolific racing engine, first being used in Group A World Rally Celicas, and then later the second-gen MR2 in the JGTC. In 1999, Team KRAFT made the bold decision to resurrect the AE86 Trueno, a car that hadn't been in production since 1987, and build it into a modern-day GT300 racer. For this, they had to make various alterations, including heavily modified bodywork, entirely new suspension derived from a Formula 3 car, and the turbocharged 4-cylinder 3S GTE engine. When all was said and done, the car didn't have much AE86 left in it. Somewhat surprisingly, it was actually a solid performer, achieving 3 top 10 finishes in its first year, including a season best of 5th at Mine. It also achieved 3rd in class in the non-championship Suzuka 1000 km, and it would only gain more attention when it appeared in Gran Turismo 2 at the end of the year. Ultimately, the car would never perform as strongly after that, achieving a couple more top 10s before being replaced with a Toyota MRS partway through 2001. The ability to put the same engine in the AE86 and GT7 allows us to partially recreate one of the JGTC's strangest cars. I guess it's not too surprising coming from Team KRAFT. After all, these were the guys who built and raced a Toyota-badged Chevrolet Cavalier in GT300 for the previous 2 years. In fact, that car actually managed an even better JGTC results than the Trueno ever could, achieving 4th at Mine in 1997. During a short stint in the series, the car was something of a fan favourite, not just because of it being an AE86, but also thanks to its development being very well documented through a series on video option following the team. Sadly, the end of this car's story wouldn't have a happy ending. In its final race at Sugo in 2001, it caught fire and was damaged very badly. After this, there were plans to restore the car, but as of current day, it's believed to be in storage somewhere in Japan, still in the same fire-damaged state. Alright, let's change gears and move on to the Toyota Alphard. This minivan was a curious inclusion in GT7, but it does have one hell of an engine swap. You can fit it with the 4.8-litre V10 from the Lexus LFA, another car that was added in GT7 post-launch. But what's really interesting about this swap is that it actually references a car from another brand entirely. Back in 1995, to celebrate 10 years since the launch of their groundbreaking Espace MPV, the Renault Espace F1 was created. Just like the regular Espace, the car was developed by Matra, but instead boasted a 3.5-litre V10 straight from Williams' championship-winning 1993 Formula 1 machine. But Williams' involvement didn't end there, as they also had a hand in the carbon fibre chassis and F1-style suspension. The engine was also mounted under the floor, giving it a midship layout. In essence, this car was a Formula 1 racer clothed in bodywork styled to look like an actual Espace. Of course, the car was never intended to race, it wouldn't have been eligible anyway, but it instead served as a promotional tool to carry out demo runs with up to 3 passengers. In real life, it was only driven a handful of times, including by Alain Prost, who won the F1 title with Williams in 1993, before it became a static museum piece. However, the car was destined to live on in the virtual world as it featured, once again, in Gran Turismo 2. Its incredible speed made it easily one of the most desirable cars in the game, and it's still fondly remembered by players even today. So, when you consider all of that, the ability to put a naturally aspirated V10 into a people carrier could only be a reference to the Espace F1. Of course, the situation with the Alphard is a bit different. 1, the position of the engine can't be changed, so the car remains front-engine. 2, even with maximum weight reduction, it's still a lot heavier than the Espace. And 3, it produces nowhere near as much downforce. This means that to drive, it really isn't anything like the Espace F1, but as a fun callback to one of the most unique cars to ever appear in this series, I still think it's pretty neat. Now, onto the final swap I want to talk about in this video. Much like the Mark IV Supra, the second-gen Toyota MR2 can be both the donor and recipient of an engine swap. However, the engine it can receive might seem a bit left field. The 4.2-litre V8 from the first-generation Audi R8. Why this engine in particular? Well, as we've seen many times already, there is a reason behind this choice. Sigma Advanced Research and Development, better known as SARD, is a Japanese racing team. You probably know them for campaigning Toyotas in GT500 for many years, some of which have appeared in Gran Turismo. But let's rewind to the early 90s. sports car racing was coming off the back of the Group C era, with the production-based GT1 category just starting to gain a foothold. Being one of the main players in the final Group C years, Toyota decided to also throw their hat into the GT1 arena. In those days, SARD was a Toyota works team. They had run their 94 CV Group C machine at Le Mans, almost winning the race in 1994. That same year, SARD was supplied a GT1 spec Supra to compete with in the burgeoning JGTC. For 1995, as well as returning to the series, they also took the Supra to Le Mans, once again representing Toyota as a whole. However, whilst this was happening, SARD also had ambitions of being a constructor again. Prior to their partnership with Toyota, SARD had developed their own Group C cars with Toyota engines. So in 1995, they rolled out their first original GT car, the SARD MC8R. Also built to GT1 regulations, this car was based on a second-gen Toyota MR2 with significant alterations. For one, it was lengthened noticeably with a tube frame construction at the rear, and it's reported that SARD made use of various leftover parts from its Group C machines. And then we come to its engine. The 1UZ FE from the Lexus LS400 was used. This is a 4-litre V8, which SARD then upgraded to over 500 horsepower, which included strapping a couple of turbos to it. As the car was registered as its own model and not just a Toyota MR2, this meant that a single road car had to be created for homologation purposes. It's important to note that the engine in the road car, the SARD MC8, was not turbocharged. Anyway, the car didn't exactly perform as SARD hoped. At Le Mans, it qualified 32nd and retired in the race after the clutch failed. Their Supra, meanwhile, qualified one place ahead and was able to finish the race in 14th overall. They also raced the MC8R at the Suzuka 1000 km that year, at least being able to finish in 26th as the last car classified. So this curious engine swap in GT7 appears to be based on the SARD MC8, the road car specifically. The Audi engine is a 4.2-litre naturally aspirated V8, making just over 400 horsepower. In terms of spec, it seems a pretty close match with the 1UZ FE and the MC8, and if you want to, you can even turbocharge it like in the race car. In real life, the race car would return in 1996 with various improvements, including a weight reduction of more than 200 kilos. Unfortunately, the opposition had also improved, and they could only achieve 24th at Le Mans, 15th in the GT1 class. They did show more speed at the Suzuka 1000 km though, qualifying a competitive 11th, but retired after only 6 laps in the race. In 1997, the car was redesigned completely, now barely recognisable as the MR2 which it had started out at. A third and final attempt at Le Mans ended with both cars built not even qualifying for the race, and a 2-car assault at Suzuka resulted in one car failing to even start and the other burning to a crisp. After this, the sole remaining car was effectively mothballed as it never competed again. Although it had been an abject failure, the MC8R actually inspired 2 far more successful race cars. Firstly, the Porsche 911 GT1, which used a similar bespoke tube-frame structure not based on any mass production model. The car would finish second at Le Mans in 1996, before the evolved GT1 98 took the win 2 years later. Then there was the Toyota GT1. A common misconception is that Toyota themselves were directly involved with the MC8R, but this isn't true. However, they were obviously aware of the project, and when they unveiled their GT1 in 1998, there were some clear overlaps. This was a GT1 car with a bespoke mid-engine chassis and powered by a twin-turbo V8. Ultimately, it was never quite able to win at Le Mans, but it did prove to be the outright fastest car in both 1998 and 1999. In case you're wondering, the white road car which the engine swap is based on was bought by a private collector and is still driven regularly. However, the 1997 redesign was so radically different that a second road car had to be created to homologate it. This black car was the only example built, but a few years ago, pictures surfaced on the internet of the car missing its entire rear end, just rotting in someone's yard. Truly, the SARD MC8 in any of its iterations was a fascinating machine. It's definitely one of those cars that you could have imagined being in Gran Turismo at some point, most likely in GT2. But the fact it never did means that this engine swap is the closest we can get to it in these games. I bet you didn't realise that randomly putting an Audi V8 into an MR2 had so much lore behind it. And that's a wrap. Let me know in the comments which of these swaps is your favourite, and if there are any other interesting references that I haven't included here. I have to give a shout out to the folks over on the Gran Turismo wiki for compiling a neat list of these engine swap references. Without this, I'm not really sure where I would have started in trying to make this video. On that note, I do have an idea for a similar video, but based on visual customization, like body kits and aero parts that also reference real life cars. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see, and if you have any suggestions for those. With all of that said, thanks for watching, and have a good one.